Welcome aboard the USS Aeronome. To become a member of our crew, please visit perfectorganism.com/support. As a patron of Perfect Organism, you'll receive exclusive perks and early access to content. Incoming audio transmission received. Please proceed to Subdeck 3 to begin playback. Thank you, and welcome aboard.
All right, sweethearts, what are you waiting for? Breakfast in bed? Another glorious day in the Corps. Day in the Marine Corps is like a day on the farm. Every meal's a banquet. Every paycheck a fortune. Every formation a parade. I love the Corps. Where's Basket?
Let's rock!
Welcome to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I'm your host, Jaime and Patrick, and I'm joined by
Patrick Green. What up, everybody?
And today we are interviewing artist and all-around awesome guy, Johnnie Christmas.
Yeah, and Johnny is, he's been a big name in fandom lately because of his work on the Gibson Alien 3 comics, which is the focus of this episode. But he's been an increasingly more prominent name in visual storytelling over the last few years with works like Sheltered and Pisces, and most recently, Angel Catbird, which is a collaboration with more than legendary Margaret Atwood and Tamara Bonvillain, who is the same colorist that he's working with Alien 3. So he's really making a name for himself, and we're so excited to have him on to talk about the Gibson Alien 3 series. So welcome, Johnny.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, so before we kind of get into the meat of the comics themselves, we just wanted to know a little bit about your background, how you got into comics, how you got into storytelling, and just a little bit about you.
Well, I always loved comics ever since I was a kid, and so I really got into them pretty heavily in high school. Went to art school, did them a bit there, just kind of for myself and with my friends, and then I kind of stepped away from them for quite some time, and then now I'm back, and it's been really good. I've been really enjoying it, and been able to work on some really exciting properties and projects with really wonderful people. So couldn't be happier.
Did you, when you say you got into comics like at kind of a young age, are there any that stick out as especially important to you?
Yeah, it was Jim Lee's X-Men run with Chris Claremont.
Yeah,
it was the first time I kind of realized that comics were made by actual people, that they weren't just like things that are like chairs or something, which chairs are made by people, I realized. But you just kind of think of them as uniform. They were very uniform. That's what it is. Like, a lot of house styles, etc. But when Jim Lee came on the scene, that's when I started seeing people who had more of a personal touch. And after that, I started hunting down auteurs. And then, of course, you start finding Mignola and Otomo and, folks like that, Jaime Hernandez, people who have like a personal style. And at that point, it was no turning back.
What was it about Jim Lee's art in particular that appealed to you?
I think it's just wired for a teenage boy's brain. It's just like, it's very exciting. Lots of, action, lots of, hyper kind of realism with some like solid cartooning, so it doesn't look like a straight up photo reference drawing or anything. So it looks like a comic, but it also has like, the proportions are, dynamic enough to look comic and superhero-y, but they're based in something. There's something like weighting them. I don't know. Obviously I'm not the only one, since he's, one of the most famous comic artists of all time. So
well, a number of his, especially his X-Men work, some of those are the biggest selling comics ever made, right?
Like ever made. Yeah, number one, I think, is still holding the record at, 8 million?
When I was a kid, that appealed to me so much too. And I never heard anybody else sort of articulate why, but I think you're right. It's something about like the kinetic aspect of it, and the fact that it feels believable, but it doesn't feel like it's like Alex Ross sort of like photorealistic painterly kind of style. It feels like really good comic art,
Yeah, really good comic art. That's a really good way to put it. And in the same way how Rob Liefeld, though he gets kind of kicked around now by some people, but his art had an excitement as well to it. You know, I think that was like an age of all, you know, that first wave of guys who went on to eventually form Image.
Image,
They
yeah.
all very kinetic, exciting style. I mean, McFarlane and Portacio and you know, Silvestri and, you know, Larson, and, you know, we can go on and on. So there was something there. It was a, you know, a main ingredient that was this excitement. It was just like baked into what they were doing.
You know, there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of pockets. I think that we can agree that there was no shortage of pockets back then. So we were wondering, what's your relationship with Alien? Did you come into this with sort of a pre-existing appreciation of the franchise, or is it something that sort of came through working on the property? What's your history with it?
Yeah, I love the Alien franchise. I mean, I'm trying to think, is it my favorite horror? Like sci-fi horror, probably. I mean, I watch those movies like a religion, because they're also no, especially the earlier ones. They're so, you know, the first two are they're almost like art films. Like the first one is like this very well-paced, well-measured thing that, you know, when you're watching it, you're like, are you allowed to do this in a sci-fi horror movie? Like, isn't it supposed to be like, you know, like crazy kinetic? And so at a young age, it was just, I couldn't believe that they were doing that. And then when I eventually saw the second one, that the pace of it is incredible. The fact that it doesn't stop. It's a lot like when I look at Fury Road, it reminds me of Aliens. Like,
oh my God, I love that movie.
Stop. The pace is relentless, but at the same time, you're getting characterization. You're getting, you know, all the storycraft is there, but without stopping. And that's just kind of like this magic trick. Like I watch that movie way too often, just trying to figure out, how do you do that? You know, like the settings are always changing, yet you're glued in the whole time. It's really something.
Would you say that's your favorite of the original trilogy, the second film?
Ooh. You know what? I think my head wants to say the first one, but my heart's saying the second one. I mean, there's because, you know, for starters, the second one, you're you know, the adrenaline's up the whole time, so you're plugged in. You know, you can't look away for a moment, because the train is moving. You know, so yeah, I would have to say the second one.
Right. Well, you know, we're actually on the podcast. We're in the middle of a very extended series at the moment on aliens, called 40 Miles of Bad Road, which comes from a quote James Cameron gave about the process of making the film. And part of what we've been doing with the series is basically investigating it so it becomes less of a monolith, like less of this thing that's sort of incomprehensibly great, and more of like a real thing, kind of like you were saying with Jim Lee. It's sort of like a product made by actual humans, you know? I think it's such a masterpiece that gets kind of lost sometimes, so it's interesting to hear you say that.
I'm curious to hear what you guys find and you know, information at the end of your examination.
No, well, I it's interesting. Like, Patrick is more of the comic guy. Most of our crew, which when we have like round tables, everyone's kind of way into the comics. The first comics I ever bought as a kid were the comics for Alien 3. And so I find it ironic. The next set of comics I ever buy as an adult are a different iteration of Alien 3. So I feel like I've come full circle. And I don't speak the language so much. I mean, I've really been enjoying what in fact, actually, I was just at Fox a week ago, and they gave me every variant cover of issue 1, which was awesome. And of course I've read issue 1, issue 2. I haven't read 3 yet. But it's just flipping through the pages. I just was like, oh my God, like I haven't done this since I was a kid, and it was for Alien. And then I bought the Newt's Tale, you know, that series, and then I ended up buying more. I wish I would have kept them. But it's just this really full circle, and now just as an adult to be able to speak to the artists. I mean, they're not just oh yeah, they're alien comics. They're really beautiful. So I wanted to compliment you on the work, really and truly. Like as an artist myself and someone who's into aesthetics of everything, it's important for me that something look good or it loses my interest, and it really looks good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So I want to go back for a minute to the actual project itself. I'm curious about how it started, like who approached you, or did you approach them? How did Dark Horse, did they come up with the idea? What's some of the background on why they're doing these unproduced screenplays?
Well, I think my editor, Daniel Chabon, I'm not sure when it occurred to him, but I know there was that article floating around in Vulture, a very, really wonderfully done piece about the William Gibson screenplay. And I don't know if Daniel came across that first or if it had been something knocking around in his head, because he's always kind of trying to figure out cool projects that he could bring to Dark Horse. And, Dark Horse has the, Alien contract. So. And
he's a Dark Horse editor?
Yeah,
okay.
He's a Dark Horse editor.
Who you've worked with in the past, or is this somebody new who sought you out?
I worked with him on Angel Catbird, and, have he's a lovely guy, great relationship. So I think he was kind of looking around at, projects. He's always looking around at projects and looking at people that, he's worked with and that he's working with. So somewhere along the line, he just reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this project? So I ran out and, I read this, both versions of the screenplay drafts, and going through the first draft, I shot an email back like, yeah, I definitely want to do this.
Wow. So it spoke to you right off the bat.
Oh yeah. Because there's lots of projects that I don't say yes to. I turn them down because they just don't, I don't know, for whatever reasons. And but this was as you're reading it, you can see it, happen.
What's funny, I was talking with Jamie about this. We did a whole extended series on the unproduced scripts about a year and a half ago, where we went through everything from obviously this, from the Gibson script to the Vincent Ward script to the Eric Red script, and for some reason this was the one that was the least visual to me, and I feel like I'm actually getting so much out of watching your art bring it to life. It's suddenly kind of making sense to me now, and it's funny because I read the script for the first time probably 8 years ago. And it's such a trip now as like a longtime fan getting to actually see what it would look like, because I'm sure there's been fan storyboards that have been put online. There's people who kind of experimented with it, but to have this like extraordinarily well produced body of work around it, it's a real visual treat as a fan.
Yeah, maybe my brain's just wired that way from being a visual artist. So because I've seen some screenplays that don't pop because they're very internal. The more internal lives of the characters, but with this one, I could see it. I could see it clearly.
Was there a moment as you were reading it where you were like, "Oh, this is the project"?
I think it was all in totality. It just all started just started racking up instead of one big aha moment. Like just page after page, it was. You just like when you get these projects, you're kind of looking for the moment to say no, and you just kind of, and then you're realizing that that moment's not going to come. Like this is a go, so it was a go.
In terms of course, it's an adaptation from 120 page plus script to comic book form, which is of course very different. Do you have to essentially make a new script, an adaptation script, and then from there, like what's that process like?
Yeah, so I had to make an adaptation script. I had to take what Mr. Gibson did and try to make it into 5 episodes. So instead of, and I didn't want to butcher it. I wanted it to be anyone who's a fan of the screenplay. I wanted them to come to it and not really feel my hand. I wanted them to think oh yeah, this is exactly what he did, right? So any like changes or modifications I did, I tried to keep them. I tried to kind of conceal my hand. So I would heighten parts to create cliffhangers for the next episode, but I didn't want them so heightened to the point where it feels something different. So I took the script and I kind of broke it down into 5 different sort of motifs for the 5 different episodes, issues. So I think it was like initiation, escalation. I forget what I call them. I think the last ones were like outbreak, frenzy, something like that. Anyway, but to just sort of like keep in mind that these had to sort of stand on their own as issues, but also speak as one piece when they're eventually collected as a graphic novel. So just kind of broke it down as scripts, and I had to take some stuff out, try to make that stuff less obvious, which was kind of hard because a lot of time, because being a novel writer, so much of the characterization was put into these really important pieces of plot. It was just kind of baked in together like a good writer would do, as William Gibson's a very good writer. So trying to pull some of that stuff apart, like, okay, I can't use this whole scene, but I really need I need this part where they say this because that leads to X, Y, or Z. So trying to, disperse things while editing. And it was interesting. It was an interesting little puzzle.
When you were making decisions like that, I'm wondering, was William Gibson consulted?
Well, yeah, I shot him. Every time I did a script, I would send him what I did. I sent him what I changed, why I changed it, and what page it was on. I wanted him.
Well, how did he respond to that? Was he cool about it?
Yeah, he was super generous. I mean, like insanely generous. He would just kind of like he didn't even add that many have that many notes to it. He was just kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense, or okay, all right. And then we met, had coffee, and which was really generous of him as well, because he's writing an agency right now, which I think he's probably wrapped up by now. But like he was in, when you're immersed in a world, like you don't want to be pulled out of it. But He was really nice for us to meet and go over this screenplay that he did 30 years ago for the changes that I wanted to talk about. So I really appreciate that.
What was that experience like, sitting down with him? Because we, as we talked about on the series that we did, this was in a lot of ways, I think, kind of a painful experience for him. I mean, the development of Alien 3 was so fraught in so many ways, as I'm sure you know. And he had the first draft, and then it was disrupted by the writer's strike, and then the studio was getting in the way of it, and then he had the second draft, and by that point they'd kind of moved on. And it was sort of and it was his first attempt at a screenplay. I kind of feel like this must be in some ways difficult for him. But maybe it's liberating. What did he talk about that at all when you met with him?
He had these great Hollywood stories. I think for him, I think it was an interesting experience. I think like any writer, he put quite a bit of himself in it, but I think he realized that like it's not his. So I think he could remove himself to some degree. This is me just guessing, but the feeling I got from talking to him about it was that, he put forth an effort, and he did realize that it wasn't up to him ultimately if it was going to be made or not. And I think as one starts one of these things, you're pretty sure that it isn't going to happen. And I think maybe later on, you're kind of, as you're going along, you're like, oh, I think this might happen, So I don't know if painful is the word for it. I can't put words in his mouth, but it didn't scar him enough where he couldn't, talk about it, or he's not interested in seeing it come to life, because he's been really supportive of it all down the line, which has been really a wonderful boon to the project.
Backing up quickly, I just so I'm, again, about the process of this, before you started, before you put your hands on the Gibson script, was there, I don't know how this works, but did you have a choice of, well, there's this script that this guy wrote, here's Gibson's script, here's that, which one do you want to do? Or did they come to you saying, this is what we want to do, this is the project, we're interested in you for this script specifically?
Yeah. They wanted a Gibson script.
Okay.
second draft. So because that one is a lot more. The first draft has a lot of like, super kinetic, cool stuff in it, but the second draft, I think, does work better as a comic because it builds in a way that that's different. That's probably more comic like, and it's the one I like best too. So I was happy about that.
Well, it's funny you say that because I was actually going to ask, if this were being paced according to the first draft, I feel like there would have to be another like 9 issues coming out, and I was thinking there's sort of no way that would work. So that makes a lot of sense. So it's not going to be quite as enormous as the first, but more kind of character driven in these last couple of issues that we have coming out.
Does build up to like full out like insanity, but the apex of it happens, in a way that isn't that wouldn't take like 15 issues of like stuff blowing up, like
right. Well, because that was kind of the problem with the first draft, right? Is it was like there was so much in that last act, and also it would have made it like basically. I think they said it would have been $170 million to produce if they'd shot it the way that he wrote it.
Weren't there like 50 xenomorphs or something? It was something
like hundreds, right? Because it was like the whole entire space station was infected, basically, which would be pretty intense. So I don't want to spoil anything. I want to be careful about that because there are a couple of issues left, but I do have a couple of questions about some things that are in the Gibson script and how you may or may not have approached them visually and from a storytelling standpoint. Well, I'm curious about a few things. And on the cover of issue 4, which is dropping in February in a few weeks, you have somebody's face revealing a xenomorph underneath. And when I talk about having a hard time visualizing the script, personally, because I'm not anywhere near as visual a person, obviously, as you are, or as Jaime is. Jaime's a great artist too. That's something that I have a hard time visualizing, and I have to say the cover, the image that was released, is extremely haunting, and it makes a lot of sense for me. So, just talking from kind of a xenobiology standpoint, for people who may not have read the script for a while, in the Gibson script, there's this trope that, there's a lot of deviations from the standard reproductive cycles of xenomorphs. And there's a lot of interesting possibilities that are kind of opened up with that I do want to touch on. But one of them is that there's an airborne virus, and that the virus is able to basically mutate somebody underneath their sort of valent skin level into a xenomorph, and then the skin gets ripped off with this thing that in the script is called the changing, I think, kind of like an American Werewolf in Paris moment or something. And then this sort of xenomorph emerges. So I'm assuming that's what's going on in the cover of the next issue. And what I'm wondering is is that something that was kind of hard to visualize, or is that something that attracted you to it, or what was it like trying to do that? Because we haven't seen it before.
It was really cool, really fun to do. You could feel the seeds that he planted in his screenplay pop up in Covenant with the airborne kind of deal going.
Yeah.
But with what I was trying to do with it, I thought it was really cool that he has these very elegant kind of ripping situations, and then things sort of emerge. But I also kind of wanted it to still feel like I didn't want to go one clean go, because then it wouldn't, because basically xenomorph heads are a lot larger than human heads. So like if you ripped, then it would like, where'd all that extra head come from? So I wanted the heads to sort of you don't see it as much on the cover, but you'll see it in the issue where there's more of a changing, and it's just like this kind of horror show that starts unreal, kind of spilling out, and then the ripping starts happening. So I wanted to kind of have it's happening under the surface, but you can kind of see the biology under the skin kind of moving around in this kind of.
I got fucking chills over here. This is so scary.
Yeah, so that, and which was really fun to draw. Watching someone kind of just come undone and like not sure what the hell's happening. Meanwhile, their bones are changing. So yeah, it was really fun.
Well, just something that's been coming up a lot lately. We've been talking about potential future directions. I'm not moving on from that. I want to come back to this in a second. But we've been talking a lot about things people want to see in future movies because, the situation at Fox is kind of very up in the air and nobody knows what's going to happen. And a lot of people keep saying body horror. And I think there's this sort of emerging consensus in fandom that that's something that we're all kind of afraid of and also really in awe of. That there's something fundamentally alien about something like egg morphing or something like this viral strain or the changing process, that's something that really scares us and also excites us in a weird way. So I think that's going to be a hit. Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was it's one moment, and along the lines of the different reproductive, for lack of better terms, vehicles of the xenomorph. What I love in the story is when the characters are talking about how any kind of xenomorph can become a queen. They're not beholden to this kind of life cycle. They're kind of always changing and adapting to their surroundings, and it kind of moves the alien back to alien territory. And I thought, again, it's just this kind of beautiful moment where you're like, man, it doesn't matter where they are. They don't need to do, they don't always need like this specific kind of egg that has a queen face hugger. That it's almost like, but it's a little reflective of, like, say, clownfish, where clownfish, the male of a brood dies, a female will rise up and turn into a male. I thought it was really inventive.
Yeah, or like Komodo dragons, right? Where like you can have hermaphroditic organisms, and actually the UPP I think references that in issue 2 or 3, which I think is so fascinating.
Yeah, it kind of goes to the theme of these transformations. So when it does happen in humans, the setup was really nicely done in that. Oh, so this is something that's going on with them. So when they're merged with a human, the possibilities are now, exponential from that key that's just sort of been opened up with that any drone can become a queen sort of idea.
And again, in the films, that question is never answered. This is something that's not canon yet. There is no single way that a queen forms. And so what's great in these expanded universe adventures we get to go on is we get to sort of postulate what would happen if this. And I think it makes a lot of sense. The xenomorph is the ultimate survivor, right? It's the ultimate extremomorph. And it would make sense that in any conditions, basically, they would find a way to have a queen. And just like you say in the comic, in the presence of a sufficient number of hosts, a queen will just make itself, basically. Something that I love about that moment with Bishop, actually, that I just wanted to point out that I noticed when I was rereading it, is the way you drew the egg growing. So, like, the root system of it is sort of it's sort of subcutaneous for him.
Yeah.
Was that your idea? Was that somewhere in the script? Where did that come from?
I just thought, like, if it just, I thought it should be growing on something, right? It would probably be feeding on whatever can get its hooks in.
Right.
I figure there's got to be some sort of material in Bishop. Like, I mean, there's got to be some sort of power pack. There's got to be something that the egg will be trying to, even if it couldn't utilize it, it'd be trying to.
So it's kind of rooting around in there for something to.
Yeah, and maybe it's finding something, maybe it's not. But I thought it'd be cool to at least see that, so that way it doesn't look like it's just placed there. Like, it's been there in this very horrible, invasive way for some time.
And it's just so horrifying. Again, it's just this because Bishop is such a noble android, and I know Gibson has gone on record saying that was his favorite part of Aliens was Bishop's arc, and that, like, he was sort of thought of Bishop as kind of a protagonist. And so it's so sad, like you see it's such a tragic fall for him. And I know in the Gibson, and I'm assuming in the comics we'll see, he has a little bit of a redemption coming up, but he's an amazing character.
Yeah, and you could tell from the screenplay that Gibson cares about him.
Did you talk to him about that at all when you met?
About his feelings about Bishop?
Yeah, and about the characters in general, like what he kind of thought about Ripley and Hicks and Newt and some of these canonical characters.
No, not really. No, we just kind of talked about story stuff and how to keep it moving forward and things I wanted to change and that sort of thing. But no, we didn't.
Interesting.
Is there and in terms of the process of creating these issues, was there a certain issue or a certain set of, I'm sorry, the words are escaping me right now. cells or whatever that you're working on that you're like, oh, this was my favorite part to do? I don't know if it was drawing Ripley or something like that, where you're like, this was really just something that you were looking forward to, kind of, okay, I'm going to bring this part to life.
Yeah, Facehugger Attack, because the Facehugger is my favorite movie monster.
Yeah.
Really? Wow, that's awesome.
And I love how you do it with those horizontal lines. Like, there's so much motion to it.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, it's so cool.
It's the most horrifying, bar none. Like, I can't think of anything more horrifying. Goddamn Facehugger. It freaks me out even talking about it right now. But also the change in that you'll see in issue 4. I was really looking forward to that. And when that day came, I was super jazzed.
Just the image, I haven't read it yet, but just the image of the face and the eyes popping out and it's just being torn up. I mean, that's nightmare material.
It's
right
so
there.
fucked up. I know. Well, I'm curious, like, why did that draw you in? Like, what was exciting about that?
I liked so there's a storyline with that character in particular. She's like a smooth operator. She's like, she's always in control. And she kind of
the cufflink eyes, right?
Yeah. Wells. And she, so just sort of the juxtaposition of having that character undergo this change that she's looking for this thing. She's on this quest for this thing, and then it comes to her, and then all of a sudden everything gets out of control, and this thing is happening to her, and it's, I don't know, there's just so many wonderful, there's so much like hubris and comeuppance and schadenfreude and all this interesting stuff going on in that scene, and it all comes together in a way where now you know that there's no turning back. It's kind of, this thing is loose in a way that they didn't even think was possible. Everyone's freaked out by it. She's freaked out by it, and it's and as a person who's now reading it, you're wondering like, oh shit, is this thing airborne now? Like what's happening now? It's a big turning point in the story, and I thought it was really cool emotionally and visually.
Which again, Jamie, that's putting the alien back in Alien, right? That's what we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
The unknown, Actually, and to that end, we've obviously been talking a lot about Covenant over the last couple of years because that's the most recent film that we have, and because it's sort of been very divisive in fandom. But something I think we can all agree about is the neomorph sequences, and especially the backburster sequence, being some of the best, really true horror in the franchise. And I'm wondering, when you were brought on board, there's very obvious connections, at least on a thematic level, with Ridley Scott's prequel work. You even very explicitly include that material about that, these are obviously bioengineered ancient weapons from some civilization that, is long gone. Were you given any guidance by either Fox or by Dark Horse about what to include and what not to include vis-a-vis prequel continuity, or was that something you kind of did on your own?
No, yeah, they kind of left me alone, except for there's a few design things where they kind of popped in, boxed it, and wanted certain ways. But in terms of the story, I was actually kind of surprised that was the adaptation was the easiest part of it. The adaptation script, approvals came fast and furious, and they did not interfere. My editor at Dark Horse, who's a sharp fellow, he would pop in with things that would just help, not like, oh well, they want it this way. It was just kind of like, oh, what are you intending with this? And I was like, oh yeah, X, Y, Z. And he's like, oh okay, cool, that works, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's pretty easy.
I think it speaks a lot to your talent as a storyteller that they were they were not precious with William Gibson's work, because he's such a legendary figure in science fiction. The fact that your choices were so dead on that they were like, yeah, go with it, and that it works, that they were right, like it works as a story. I think it's such a testament to what you bring to it. So I know we don't have that much time left. There's a couple more things I wanted to touch on. One of them, just briefly, and Jamie, I want you to jump in here too, because you're such a great thinker. Part of what I think works about the Gibson script is the way that it uses analogy and metaphor. Obviously, about there's the whole UPP angle, which is sort of a Cold War metaphor, and then there's the whole changing aspect, which is an AIDS metaphor. At least some people view it as that. Something that I'm wondering about, if you were to make the screenplay now, if you were William Gibson writing in 2018, Oh God, it's 2019 now. What do you think? What would you be writing about if you wanted to kind of maintain some of that metaphorical illusion?
That's a very good question. I first of all, I think it might be entirely different in that the UPP and the Cold War thing came from the producers. That was a mandate that Gibson got at the start.
Right, that was Geiler and Hill had that idea, right?
Yeah. So who knows? Like, it would probably be entirely alien. That's a very good question. That's a very good question, Jamie.
Well, what about? Well, two questions. If you could tell an alien story on your own, I'm interested in what that might be, how that might look. Obviously, just kind of a general idea. Second question. Is this kind of a dip in the water for maybe another adaptation series later on, maybe later in the year or next year? So those are my questions.
I would probably do something around the Genesis, like which I'm sure they wouldn't want. Fox would probably want to keep holding on to that. Like, like that's the most alluring thing. Like, what environment creates the most perfect killing machine? Like, what environment is so hostile that that's what came out of it? That's that's very alluring to me. And I'd be very curious if Dark Horse wanted more of the scripts adapted. It'd be interesting to sort of see what happened there. But for now, this is it for me in the Alien universe. But I do enjoy it, and if opportunity came along again, perhaps I'd consider it.
Awesome.
Well, something that you bring to it that I feel like we haven't seen very much is a real sense of, it really reads like a comic book, like we were talking about in the very beginning. I think a lot of that has to do with Tamara Bonvillain's colors, which are just extraordinary. I think the way that she uses light and brightness is something really novel within this IP. And I know that, I've seen your work on Angel Catbird, which is also fucking amazing. And I think that her color, she does the colors for that, right?
Yep, she does.
It's just a similar sense of almost like the page can't contain the luminosity of the colors that are being used, and we don't see that with Alien, and I think it's something that's really hard to pull off, but these books do. And what's great to me is that we just finished with Gabriel Hardman's Dust to Dust series, which was extremely different and enjoyable in different ways, and one of my other favorites over recent years was James Stokoe's Dead Orbit, which is, again, just a completely different take. It's very kind of abstract and very dark. And then we have this Alien 3, and you would think, a William Gibson Alien 3 adaptation, like how dark can it get? And it's actually not. It's actually very bright, and it's very kinetic, and it's very, compelling from a visual standpoint. And I think it's been refreshing. And I really hope that it helps open up avenues for different types of storytelling within the IP. I think it really will. One other thing I want to touch on before we go to listener questions, before we close, is we've had a number of episodes. It was supposed to be one episode, and then because the conversation couldn't stop and because we had so many people writing in, we've been expanding it into 2 and maybe 3. We've been talking a lot about the Queen. I'm not going to ask you to spoil anything because in the Gibson screenplay there are queens involved, and I don't know if you used them or if you didn't use them, and we can leave that. But just from a personal standpoint, as an artist and a writer and a storyteller and a fan, do you feel, and this is Jamie's question, so I want to make sure he gets credit for that, do you feel that having a queen dumbs things down, or is it all disempowering of the mystery of Alien, or do you like having a queen in the story?
Wait. Let's reframe that question. I don't think that the queen dumbs things down. My question would be, is the presence of a queen a little too familiar and less alien? Let's frame it that way.
I would say with the speed in which aliens moved, it's a helpful shorthand. So a character doesn't have to look into the camera and go, oh, well, I see, and go into this sort of techno babble that Star Trek folks need to do to kind of frame these ideas. So I think the Queen kind of immediately, in a very, I mean, it's like we're familiar with it now, so we're like, oh yeah, Queen, alien Queen, whatever. But I'm sure at the time it must have been quite like, oh shit, they're like bees, you know. So I wouldn't say it dumbs things down. I think it's a very helpful story device when you've got, 30 seconds to explain a thing, and also giving the viewer something new. Because if it was just Xenos all over again, I'm sure it'd been very exciting. But if you give them, like, if you step it up, you keep moving along this evolution. I think I like them. I think they're cool. And plus the fact, and the way Cameron's Queen looked with the puppetry, like how it was all janky moving and stuff. I thought it was just kind of like this eerie. It kind of took it back to horror a bit. It's kind of like filming someone walking and playing it back in reverse. How it just kind of moves in a slightly weird way.
Yeah,
it is kind of janky. You're right. It's sort of like what, and then that what question is sort of where the horror creeps in, because it's like, how is this thing moving? And why does it look like that? Yeah. Right.
It's not coming straight. Like, it's moving straight, but it's legs are going sideways, kind of like it's just. It's trying to. Is it a crab or is it a what? Is that?
Right. Exactly. All right, so before we close, we had a bunch of questions come in from listeners. We told them yesterday that we were going to have you on the show, and everybody was super excited about it, and they asked a lot of things. We're not going to have time to get to all of them because I know you're a busy guy and you have another interview coming up. But there's a couple that I wanted to touch on. One of them comes from a good friend of ours, Bryant Dillon, who was actually on the most recent Queen episode, and he said he would love to know more regarding Hicks' acid scars. The visuals are much less severe than those in previous depictions in Dark Horse Comics and even the Blomkamp concept art, but also much closer to the wounds actually shown in the second film. Was there discussion on how scarred a Hicks should be, and what was your reasoning as the artist?
There wasn't any discussion, but I know they wanted it to look like, we had the rights to use Michael Biehn likeness, so I think they wanted it to look like Michael Biehn, in the bounds of a comic book, like not super photorealistic, but like where someone could go like, oh yeah, Michael Biehn. So I thought that if I really start him up, which would be cool to draw, it would make him look further away from what he looks like, and plus it was kind of closer to what happened in the movie. Like, it wasn't. Then again, we don't know how intense the acid is. So yeah, maybe it could like melt half his face off. But I thought if it just kind of was like a top layer of skin kind of thing, it would serve both needs that we needed to address.
Right, because it's clear that he's injured, but he also looks like Hicks. Like, you can tell that that's who he is.
We did this thing where we had like one of his eyes a different color also. Right, subtle. Right. But just just like a few little things that like, things are a little different for our pal Hicks here.
Cool. Bradley John Sudbeck asks, how do you feel about David Fincher's versions of Alien 3?
I enjoyed it. Sure, it gets a lot of. But the thing I like about the movies in the Alien franchise is that each one does have the hand of the auteur. Like, each one does belong to the director, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do one, because I felt like I didn't have to make it look like anything. Like, it could just look like my art, because each Alien movie looks like a movie that director would make. So, yeah, it's not as good as the first two, in my opinion, but it was what it was, like, and it was truly that. And I know Fincher had his problems with it too. Like, he apparently is not jazzed about it, but it
to put it lightly, yeah.
But it's a document. It's it feels very 90s. It does feel very 90s. I'll say that.
It does have that subversive 90s quality to it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does feel like a 90s music video.
It definitely does. Well, because it was made by a 90s video music director, at the end of the day. Another question from a listener, Nathan Gribble asks, when taking the classic Alien's perfect design into consideration, did you ever feel like slightly augmenting the creatures to make them look more unique for this adaptation? And if so, what did you or what would you change if you could change the design of the xenomorph at all?
Yeah, so what I did was I wanted it to look different but the same. You know, the old Hollywood trope, give me the same thing but different. So what I did was I took it back. So I started looking at a lot of Giger. For the we have like a hybrid Xeno in it. So what I did was I tried to make it look closer to Giger's original alien drawings, xenomorph drawings. So that way, it is what it is, but it's also kind of new by being super retro. So if you looked at like art books on Giger, you'd be like, oh shit, he's using the Giger Xeno. Where, you know, you can kind of see through the skull dome thing to see the Xeno's skull underneath, that sort of thing. So that's what I did.
Awesome. And I think we have time for one more question. This comes from Christopher Cooksey, and he says, "What would?" And you've kind of hinted at this with a previous question, but I'm curious if you can kind of develop it out a little bit. He says, "What would Alien 4 be if you were to write it after this story?"
Oh, I think Alien 4 would be. I don't want to spoil it by saying who survives, but the survivors would hunt down the xenomorphs. Like it would start off as kind of like a detective sort of thing where they're like taking all the clues from everything that they've got. They try and track down the source of where the hell this thing might have possibly come from, and they would either find it and the confrontation would happen there, or they would find something radically different that points to a wider world in which these crazy creatures came out of.
I, for one, would love to see you do that. I feel like that would be so cool. But, you know, I understand. You know, you're a busy guy. You got stuff to do.
Hey, do it. I'll do it.
I just want to, on behalf of the show and on behalf of all the people listening, just really thank you, not only for coming on and giving us your time, but also for giving us a wonderful new story to share and to cherish and to talk about, and to come back in 10 years, you know, and people are talking about some of their favorite moments in the expanded universe, and your work's going to be referenced in fandom. And I really just want to thank you for that, for giving us something to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, even for me, like I said, I'm not a comic guy, but it was exciting to go out and buy like a comic that kind of continued the Ripley journey, even though she's kind of not fully in it, but still it's kind of that family that we're so used to, and in a new world. It's been pretty awesome.
Oh, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me on. Like I really appreciate this.
For sure.
Of course. And where can people find you if they want to look you up on social media, you know, on the internet? Where can we look for your work and what you got coming next?
On Instagram, I'm at Johnny with an IE, Johnny Xmas. Twitter, I'm J_Xmas, XMAS. And, you know, Facebook, Johnnie Christmas, you can find me there. And yeah, the next thing I got coming is a sci-fi that I'm writing that'll be coming out this year around summertime.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been fun. We'll see when it. I can't wait for the world to see it.
Great.
Awesome.
We'll be watching with bated breath. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thanks again.
Thanks,
so
Johnny.
Appreciate it.
Have a great night.
All right, you guys too. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Jamie.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye. For more on this and our other projects, please visit www.perfectorganism.com. If you'd like to join the conversation, find us on our closed Facebook group, Building Better Worlds. To support the show, please consider visiting www.perfectorganism.com/support. We've got some great perks available. And as always, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing the show. We can't tell you how much your support means to us, but we can hopefully show you by continuing to provide better, more ambitious, and more dynamic content for years to come.